It's been almost a century since my grandfather, Gustav E. Kahn, purchased the Colby Abbot building from Edwin Abbot and the family of Charles Colby. Even then, the building was already 40 years old. Come on in, let's take a look. I'm Charles Kahn, Jr. My wife, Patty Keating Kahn, and I own the building now, but Patty is the magician. As the hands-on owner-operator for the last 20 years, Patty brought this building back from a somewhat dingy 1950s decor to the grandeur of the original structure. In this video, I'll share with you some history of the building and show you a few of the wonderful features we have today. Let's begin by meeting Charles Colby and Edwin Abbot.
But before we meet Colby and Abbot, I'd like to introduce you to my wife. If you or someone you know needs office space, have them contact Patty. Patty Keating Kahn, email address is msbiz@att.net, or you can call her at 414-276-8484. In this video, I'm going to tell you a little bit of the history of the Colby Abbot building, go on to talk about the modernization that was done in the mid-century. That would be the 20th century, around the 1950s, 1960s era. Then we're going to show you some things about the Colby Abbot building today, as well as looking into the future. So the Colby Abbot building is sitting on the corner that is the northwest corner of North Milwaukee Streets and East Mason in the city of Milwaukee. The construction was completed in 1885. But the history of the building begins at least 15 years earlier. Charles Lewis Colby was born in Massachusetts, educated at Brown University. He was very successful in the shipping industry in the first Massachusetts and then New York, but he was called away to help his father on an investment opportunity that his father, Gardner Colby, had out in the West. The West, by the West, I mean the state of Wisconsin. Gardner Colby was going to build a railroad in the central part of northern Wisconsin, and I'll tell you about that in just a few minutes. So Charles began working on the railroad in around 1870. He, over time, served in the Wisconsin legislature. He was a politically progressive legislator and was passionately opposed to any reinstatement of Wisconsin's death penalty. Edwin Abbot, also from Massachusetts, he was educated at Harvard and became an attorney. He practiced law in Boston for several years, had a very good practice there, but he decided to join the Wisconsin Central Railroad in 1876 with Colby's to get this done. He was general counsel and eventually president of the railroad itself. So the railroad plan was to build a line, all the way through thick forested areas of Wisconsin, from Menasha on Lake Winnebago up all the way to Ashland on the shores of Lake Superior. And they began that route in 1870. They worked about a year and a half, I think, and they got only up to this point where it switches from going west from Menasha up north to Ashland. That was a place called Station 51. And Station 51 is where they ended up after about a year and a half, and they ran out of money. They ran out of money, so they had to wait there for another year and a half until Charles Colby or his father back east could secure more funds, and then they finished the line all the way up to Ashland. The name of the city now, it's no longer Station 51. They named the city after Charles Colby, and just north of Colby is the city of Abbotsford. These are both west of Wausau, east of Eau Claire, and just directly south of Medford, Wisconsin. Of course, you probably heard they had a cheese factory in Colby. The cheese, the cheddar mistake that turned out to be Colby cheese was named after the city that was named after Charles Colby. So Colby and Abbot worked together on this rail line, and the line eventually, along with some connecting service from Northern Pacific, went all the way from Chicago, here on Lake Michigan, all the way to St. Paul. The Wisconsin Central line had its offices in Milwaukee, of course, and they needed a building. They needed their own office building, so they engaged a fine, excellent architect with a great reputation, Edward Townsend Mix, to build them to design a building. Mix had been the state architect for the state of Wisconsin. He was the designer of the Plankinton House, also the Chicago, Milwaukee, and St. Paul Depot, that wonderful facility that has unfortunately left us now, taken down to the wrecking ball. Two buildings that remain standing on East Michigan Avenue, wonderful gems, are the Mitchell and Mackey buildings, and also the Iron Block building is still there on East Wisconsin Avenue. So Mix designed the building, and it was completed in 1885. Here, the building was a red brick building, and of course, at that time, there was no color photography, but artists have decided to color the photo, so this is pretty much what it would have looked like at the time. A red brick building, probably some bright awnings. I'm going to show you a couple things about this. The building is built in a U shape with a light well in the center. The whole first floor is built, but above the second floor, and there's just this one brief bridge on the second floor connecting the two sides of the building. But other than that, there's a light well going up the center between the west wing and the east wing. Each wing of the Colby Abbot building has its own central corridor and then office suites on either side of the corridor. The building was lit by natural sunlight. You see, there are 3 windows at each position. There's the upper sash and the lower sash, but above the upper sash is the transom window that lets even more light in. The ceilings were 11 feet high, and at the top of each ceiling of the upper floors and the office suites was coffered, a coffered design, that is, hand-carved boxes in every ceiling throughout the building. I'll show you pictures of those as we go further in this. In the corridors, there were windows, frosted glue glass windows in each corridor on each wing, separating the office suites from the corridor. So light could flow from the outside through the office suites and on into the corridor without needing any artificial lighting. Of course, it's Wisconsin, and in the winter, the sun goes down pretty early. They also had natural gas lighting. For heating, what they did is used fireplaces. You see up here, there are these chimneys, several chimneys throughout the building. These go above the fireplaces in each and every one of the suites. That's what warmed the offices. These were coal-burning fireplaces. The interesting thing, however, is that 20 years after completion, the owners of the building decided it was time to do some additional enhancements. So, unfortunately, Edward Townsend Mix was no longer on Earth, and so they decided to go out and employ another wonderful architect of the time. In 1906, they employed architect Eugene R. Liebert. He was also the architect of the McGeough and the Germania buildings, both fine Milwaukee icons, still standing today. And they set upon to do some improvements, some enhancements to the Colby Abbot building. That's when we think that the marble was imported from Italy that lines this lobby, as well as lines all of the corridors throughout the building, and also the stairwells. The beautiful staircases are all lined in marble. In this lobby, there's marble on the floor, marble on the ceiling, and marble on the walls. They moved the front entrance from Mason Street to Milwaukee Street. At least that's what I think happened at that time. Also, it's likely that it was that time that they brought electricity into the building and added the elevators. Adding the elevators and the electricity allowed them to do one more thing. So the big thing that occurred in 1906 was a sixth floor. This has been a 5-story office building, but with the help of Eugene R. Liebert, they added a sixth story on the top of the building. So this is the building, and you see it was 5 stories, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then the chimney stuck up above. You may notice this arched window on the 6th floor on the east-facing office, and also one thing I'll show you later on is the detailed design along with we call it a frieze of cherubs on the top of the building. That was on the 5th floor when the building was built. Now here's the 6-story office building. After 1906, it's the same building, the same U-shape, the same office suites and corridors, except there's a 5th floor that's built on in between the 4th and the 6th. This arched window was moved up, and those chimneys were basically consumed by the additional floor. So they actually had to add some chimney portions, but they didn't go up above the roof like they had initially. Just 20 years after that, the building was sold to my grandfather, Gustav E. Kahn, and a couple partners. Gus eventually bought out the partners, and so he was running it himself. Here's my grandfather, Gustav E. Kahn. Gus was a quite respected structural engineer. He was the engineer on the development, the building of what we would now call Miller Valley, the Grand Avenue Viaduct, which is also sometimes called the Wisconsin Avenue, the old Wisconsin Avenue Viaduct, a magnificent structure. Also the structural engineer on the bridges in Lake Park on the east side of Milwaukee, and also on the 735 North Water Street building, which was originally the First National Bank building, or what we sometimes refer to as the old First Wisconsin National Bank building. After my father graduated from college and came back to Milwaukee, he helped Gus in running the Colby Abbot building. He is Charles Kahn Sr., that would be Chuck, and I'm Chuck Jr. During those years, the building began looking a little old. This is the Colby Abbot building back in the this is probably the 1930s. So what I'm going to do now is tell you about some of the tenants that we've had. You see here, there's a sign to a restaurant called Old Heidelberg. This was the first name given to our most famous tenant at the Colby Abbot building, Karl Roche's Old World German restaurant. Here's the facade of Karl Roche's, a more recent facade of Karl Roche's. If you're one of the tens of thousands of people who ever dined there, you'd recognize this photo of the interior, the beautiful, magnificent, really interior ambiance that Roche's had. Karl Roche's was in business at the Colby Abbot building for most of its 116 years or 113 years of operation, and it was purchased by a new owner in 2016, and a year later it closed. But we've had a variety of amazing tenants, a wonderful family of tenants over the years. On the first floor alone, the ground level, we've had restaurants and taverns, an appliance store selling electrified ice boxes. The early Frigidaires were sold there. When I was growing up in the late 50s and the early 60s, there was the sheet music store, Kranick Sheet Music Store there. We've had investment firms, insurance agencies, wonderful art galleries have had their home there. The prescription center, a pharmacy, was with us for many years on the corner, a copy and print shop as well. Right now, we have the Atelier barbershop and salon, a high-end salon. And if you want great hair, you should stop there. Also, the Urban Milwaukee store sells local gifts from Milwaukee. Urban Milwaukee, you may know, is this amazing, wonderful website that keeps us informed about what's happening locally and statewide in our community. On the upper floors, we have had a wonderful mix of professional offices. We've had some of the most accomplished and famous architects in the community have their offices at the Colby Abbot building. Accountants, attorneys, investment managers, insurance agencies, and even government lobbyists have had their offices, actually still do have their offices there. Corporate and business offices as well for a variety of companies, manufacturers, sales reps, real estate management firms, importers. Almost any kind of business could have its office here at the Colby Abbot building. There are or have been physicians. We have a chiropractor. There have been therapists of all sorts, and yoga and Pilates studios remain with us as well. We've had artists, including the famous Milwaukee artist David Lenz was there in the Colby Abbot building for many years, as well as political candidates. As a matter of fact, we have four former tenants right now who are serving in positions of public trust, two of whom became judges, another one an elected official, and another one an appointed official. Hair and nail salons upstairs, as well as the one that we have on the ground floor. One of the things we're most proud of at the Colby Abbot building is that we've been able to host a number of community and civic organizations, including the Milwaukee Metropolitan Fair Housing Council, the HPGM, Hispanic Professionals of Greater Milwaukee, are with us as well. The Cream City Foundation have been with us for many years, and we're proud of that, as well as the Office for Professional Dimensions. In the past, we've had the Wisconsin Philanthropy Network. ABCD got its start at the Colby Abbot building. That was its first location after breast cancer diagnosis. Prevent Blindness Wisconsin was with us for over 40 years. And the Leaders Forum got their start with us, American Jewish Committee as well, and the National Conference of Community and Justice with us for decades, and also the Milwaukee Ethnic Council. It's always a challenge to operate real estate. And in the post-Depression, post-World War II era, my father had his own challenges. Here is Dad, Charles Kahn Sr., at his desk at the Colby Abbot building. And if you look in the back, you'll see the wall covering is actually wood paneling. Wood paneling was the thing in the late 40s and into the 1950s. That's what was popular. And so a lot of the older artifacts of the building were covered up with this wood paneling in almost every suite. Not only wood paneling, but lowered ceilings, that is drop ceilings. Fluorescent lights dropped in the drop ceilings. Instead of 11-foot high ceilings with magnificent coffered boxes on the top, these were simple, flat, white, acoustical tile ceilings with fluorescent, the greatest modern invention, fluorescent lighting dropped in to each and every one of the suites. And not only that, the corridors, the same thing happened in the corridors. So here's what the wood paneling looked like. And that's basically the finest wood paneling that was available that Dad installed in many of the buildings. This picture I got from the internet, it's not really the Colby Abbot building, but it looks like most of the offices at the Colby Abbot building in the 1950s and throughout the 1960s. But that's not what we have today. Dad had to modernize the building to keep people interested, but now it's returned to some of its original grandeur. So these are now a number of office suites, and you'll feel the warmth. This one you can tell is that office on the 6th floor looking east with the arched window. We love these special features. The ceilings have been raised back up. The acoustical tile has been removed, and the fluorescent fixtures have been replaced with LEDs. Here I'm going to show you something else in this inner office of a therapist, is the fireplace. The fireplace here made of cream city brick, and a mantle has been put up. Now the fireplaces do not work. Some people put lights in to make it look like there's a fire. But the thing that I want you to know is that none of them were exposed. Dad, in the mid-century modern era, felt it necessary to hide them so that the building didn't look old. Every single one of them was covered up when I was running the building through the 1980s, and there was one of the fireplaces that was open. All the rest were covered up because that's the way the tenants wanted. Of course, as the era developed and passed, tenants didn't even know that they were there. And it wasn't until a few years after that, when Patty got involved, that she began exposing them and showing other tenants, people who were considering to come in, what the options were for having these beautiful cream city brick fireplaces exposed, having the ceilings raised, and LED lighting replacing the fluorescents. So these are what some of the newer office suites look like. In terms of the corridors, Dad had to modernize those as well. This is the way the corridor looked in the 1970s, lowered, that is acoustical tile, fluorescent lights. And you see here, there's this big gap in the wall. That's where a window is. That's where the window came in from the corridor, lighting the hallway. From the office suite, from the outside to the office suite to the corridor to light the hallway. Same on this side. Just big gaps, but in fact, there's a window that Dad felt it necessary to cover up so the building didn't look old. Tenants wouldn't come to buildings that were old, and buildings were being torn down at that time to build new, taller office buildings. Here's another view of, again, a different floor in the Colby Abbot building. But that was then, and this is now. Since Patty got involved, wing by wing, floor by floor, she's restored the grandeur. And this is the way that the first corridor looks now. She's exposed not only the windows in the hallway to going back into the office suites, but also the transom windows above each of the doors. So, and these are frosted glass, so it's not a privacy issue. Frosted glass on the door as well, and LED lighting. But you see, the dropped-in acoustical tile is all gone. It's a much more cleaner, a nicer, more inviting look. Now I'm moving on to a few of the special features that we have at the Colby Abbot building that we're proud of. The original cream city brick fireplaces, as I mentioned, are returned to many, many of these offices. And tenants use them either as decoration or they put something in there. Some people use them as a planter and put flowers or plants inside that opening that used to be for a coal stove. Here are the coffered ceilings. You see that on this photo I took, it shows a little bit of the windows and also the ceilings themselves. Here's a close-up of the coffered ceiling, and you see the design. This is hand-carved design built throughout the entire building at the time that it was built back in 1885. The LED lighting that I told you about, I think you saw this, well, you saw it in some of the corridors. We have a working brass mailbox in the lobby. This is one of the mailboxes that the Postmaster General has not snatched yet. Marble staircases, as I mentioned, and we're very happy with them. These go up throughout the building, and it's just a really nice, relatively wide staircase. The the cherub frieze at the top of the building remains standing today. And one thing that's lasted all this time as well is the nameplate, Colby and Abbot building, over the center between the two rings, which is why I think that the main entrance was over there on Mason Street. Here, I'll show this to you. This is one of the earlier structures, rather photos. And this is right here, is that stone, probably hand-carved nameplate. So this is the way the building looked in the early 1950s. And you see it was the red brick, and it was getting to look a little bit old for the times. So what Dad did to modernize it, not just the interior office spaces, not just the corridors, but also the exterior, he upgraded the building to have a white stone finish. So there's a white stone covering, which is attached to the building itself. It's actually permanently attached to the building itself. And at the lower level is a different kind of stone. Stone panels are put on there. Here's a close-up of that. This is Milwaukee Street, looking south here where my laser pointer is. Here is the front entrance, the current front entrance of the building. That would be on Milwaukee Street. And you'll see the stone face that Dad put up that really was old very quickly. It was dated and frankly a little bit ugly. So around 2010, Patty decided it was time for a change, and she put in a lot of energy, a lot of cost, and fully changed the front facade so that this is the same picture now on Milwaukee Street. Added individual storefronts with glass entrances for each of these offices, and upgraded the whole look and feel of the Colby Abbot building. So this is the way it stands today. The final thing I want to tell you about is 2020 and beyond. We suffered a trauma in early June of 2020. There was a fire in the tavern that was right in between, on the first floor, in between the east wing and the west wing of the building. That space was destroyed, and it's all being rebuilt. The rest of the building is all standing due to the heroic and really beautiful efforts of the City of Milwaukee Fire Department. They saved the Colby Abbot building. Both wings are in great shape, but there was smoke infiltration throughout the building, and there was some harm to some of the electrical features and some other things. And so we've embarked upon a whole series of upgrades, most of which are well underway or even completed. Electrical upgrades to the service in the building, which is really going to be beneficial. New flooring, carpets, and window treatments on many of the offices. A deep cleaning and painting of, I think, every single office suite from top to bottom. We're installing new elevators and an updated HVAC system with COVID responsive filtering. So that's what we have in the Colby Abbot building. It's actually better than ever. Again, if you need office space or you know someone who does, just contact Patty. Email her at msbiz@att.net or call 414-276-8484. So I hope you found this interesting and worthwhile, and I hope you'll come and see us when we get back to reality. Thank you. Bye-bye.